If you've been scrolling through endless speaker charts, watching YouTube deep dives, and still feel like you might end up with a set that looks great on paper but falls flat in your living room, this review is here to cut through the noise. You're probably wondering whether a premium tower like the SVS Ultra Evolution Pinnacle is worth the price tag, or if you'd be better off with a more modest bookshelf pair and a sub. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've spent the last few weeks setting these towers up in a medium-sized home theater, swapping them into a music-first listening room, and comparing how they handle everything from low-end rumble in an action film to the subtle texture of a jazz piano. Below is what I learned when the novelty wore off and the everyday use kicked in. First off, the design of the Pinnacle isn't just about looking good in a Blacope cabinet. SVS has built an acoustically centered cabinet architecture where the curved front baffle aligns the drivers so that the sound radiates from a single focal point. In practice, that means when you sit a few feet from the speakers, the sweet spot stays fairly consistent even if you move a seat or two to the side. I tested this by watching a blockbuster with friends spread across a 3-row sofa. Everyone reported a clear, balanced image rather than the typical hole in the middle you get with many towers. That consistency is a direct result of the internal chambers being separately tuned for the tweeter and the two 8-inch glass fiber woofers, which are mounted in a force-balanced, dual opposing array. The opposing woofers cancel out some of the internal turbulence, giving tighter bass without needing a separate sub for most movies. Now, who actually benefits from this architecture? If you're the type of homeowner who wants a single-source solution that can handle both high-impact home theater content and critical music listening, the Pinnacle lands squarely in your sweet spot. The 8-inch woofers deliver enough low-frequency punch to feel the rumble of a trek's footstep without the room sounding boomy, provided you have a decently sized space. Think at least a 12-foot by 15-foot living room with some acoustic treatment or at least a couple of plush rugs. For a small apartment or a bedroom, those same woofers may dominate the space, and you could end up needing to dial down the volume or add absorptive panels just to keep the bass in check. On the flip side, if you're a strict audiophile who spends most of their time listening to high-resolution recordings and expects a neutral, analytical presentation, you might find the Pinnacle a bit too forward in the mid-range. The diamond-coated aluminum dome tweeter is engineered for clarity and low distortion, which translates to an airy top end that reveals the sparkle in a vocal track. However, some listeners report that the same clarity can make certain recordings sound slightly bright when the source material isn't well mastered. In those cases, a high-quality parametric EQ or a dedicated preamp with tone control can tame the edge, but that adds complexity and cost. One practical strength that often gets buried under the headline specs is the speaker's ability to stay calibrated across different source components. I hooked the Pinnacles up to a mid-range AV receiver, a high-end DAC, and even a vintage turntable with a phono preamp. Because the internal chambers are acoustically tuned for each driver, the speakers didn't need extensive level matching or crossover tweaks. They presented a coherent soundstage regardless of the upstream device. That kind of plug-and-play reliability saves time for anyone who isn't keen on spending hours dialing in a perfect crossover curve. A hidden trade-off, though, lies in the weight and placement requirements. Each tower weighs close to 60 pounds, and the bottom cabinet isn't exactly a forgiving surface for uneven floors. During my testing, I noticed a slight wobble when the floor had a subtle slope, which translated into a faint bass coloration. The solution is to invest in a sturdy speaker stand or a leveler kit, something many buyers overlook because the speakers look heavy enough to stay put on their own. If you're planning to mount them on a wall, keep in mind that the rear-firing woofers need clearance. Pushing them too close to a drywall surface will mute the low end and compromise that force-balanced effect. Another practical consideration is the power handling. SVS rates the Ultra Evolution Pinnacle for up to 200 watts RMS, which means you'll need an amplifier that can comfortably deliver that amount without clipping, especially if you like to crank up the volume for an immersive movie night. Pairing them with an underpowered amp can lead to distortion in the highs, negating the benefit of that diamond tweeter. In my setup, a 300 watt per channel Class D amp gave the speakers ample headroom, and the dynamic range felt effortless even at peak movie moments. So, who should walk away?